Mary is a divisive figure for many Christians, and arguments have raged since the Reformation about her place in our faith. And I wouldn't be so arrogant as to suggest that I could solve the arguments today. But let me try and sum up the division in a few words. The dilemma is that Mary is both ordinary and extraordinary. And somehow we have to find our way through that tension, because both descriptions are right. So let's begin with the Annunciation and a painting on the next screen. This is in my top 10 of all paintings, so I am being very self-indulgent in showing this to you. I've lost count of the number of times I've been to the National Gallery to look at this painting, and if you ever get the chance, it's in through the Sainsbury wing doors, left at the top of the stairs, and it's in room 58. The first thing to tell you is we know that this was painted by Fra Lippi, who died in 1469. He painted it for the all-powerful Medici family, who were the ruling family of Florence. And we know that because if you look at the base of the pillar on which the vase sits, carved into the stone is the crest of the Medicis. And this crest was in use from about 1447. This picture, which is an odd shape for a picture, was probably a bed head to start with and was then repurposed and hung over a door in a study at the Medici Palace. In the picture, Mary is kneeling before the angel Gabriel, who is bringing her the news that she could be the mother of God's Son. And it's really interesting to note that the two figures almost mirror each other as they bow in mutual respect. We know we have the right Mary because the lilies in the pot and behind Gabriel's head are the symbols for Mary, Mother of Jesus. When I've taken students to see this painting, there are two things that I really like to point out and which intrigue them. One is the hand at the very top of the picture, coming out of a deep blue cloud which represents heaven. The hand is of course intended to show that the hand of God is in this matter. This is not just an unmarried girl getting pregnant. This is God's will at work. But even more wonderful is the tiny dove, which of course represents the Holy Spirit. And you can see it hovering just above Mary's knee. It's flying towards a very small slit in her dress, which is just above her left wrist. You can see a dark mark there. And if we were in the National Gallery, you'd be able to see that from the hole in her dress, there comes a golden light. This symbolizes the moment and the place where life will begin inside her. And Mary bows her head and accepts the task she has been given. Mary is not arguing. She is obedient to God and accepts whatever the future brings. So the picture we have is of an ordinary girl becoming extraordinary, because she's not bargaining or begging. She just says yes and accepts the will of God, which will change her life forever. And in that one moment of graceful acceptance, the world changes, and we can anticipate some of the extraordinary things that will happen to this ordinary woman and her child. And in the next slide, we can see the predictions for that. Today we read and listened to Mary's hymn of praise as our gospel reading, which we may know as the Magnificat. And I was struck by how much Mary's hymn was a foretaste of Jesus' own words. An ordinary woman using extraordinary words. She was a herald of what was to come. In the Magnificat, she said, "He had showed strength with his arm. He scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He hath put down the mighty from their seats, and hath exalted the humble and meek. He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent empty away." And from the Beatitudes, which Jesus gave us some many decades later, we have, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." What both say is that wealth and high value stuff was no longer to be the be all and end all of life. People who are proud will be humbled, earthly thrones will fall, and those who are less fortunate will find life better. The hungry will be fed, and the rich will be hungry. This, in Mary's words, were a foretaste of Jesus' words on the Sermon on the Mount. If we go to the next picture, we perhaps see a foretaste of what we shouldn't do, which is to put Mary on a plinth and treat her as completely extraordinary and thus keep her at a distance. That suggests that she was so amazing that she's far beyond us, and we could not ever begin to emulate her grace, goodness, and obedience to God. If we create this false sense of holiness and make her into something that becomes untouchable for us, then we will find it almost impossible to relate to her as an ordinary person, as part of our family. And so I like the next slide, because this is a sense of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph at home being a family. Joseph is hard at work planing some wood in the carpenter's shop, and Mary is talking to Jesus about a bit of woodwork he's been doing with his father. The artist obviously couldn't resist showing us that what Jesus had made was a cross, which was prescient of things to come. And in the next picture, which is really a second best picture, because what I wanted to show you was one of my favourite windows in our church, but of course I couldn't get in to do that. It's the one which sits very suitably behind our children's corner and has a very similar look in many ways to this picture. Our window is called the windmill window because in one hand Jesus holds a toy windmill and in the other a piece of string which makes the sails turn when he pulls it. He is held securely and happily in his mother's arms as he plays. So we see him in this picture. There is apparently only one other window like that in the world, but that's not the important thing. The point is that in a church dedicated to St. Mary, we have an image which is reassuringly about an ordinary woman who we can relate to, who suffered agonies when as a boy her son got lost on a trip to Jerusalem. She reacts just as we would have done. And then we move to our next slide. Seeing Mary as too different will lead us into trouble, because the reality is that she was human, with all the perils and pain that brings to each one of us too. When she gave birth, it would have been with the birth pangs that every mother will recognize. When she worried about her son, it would again be something that everyone who's ever cared for a child will recognize. This ordinary flesh and blood woman was tested, and in a moment of supreme and extraordinary grace, she said yes to God and became extraordinary. And in Mary, being human, met with the divine and was mixed, and the world changed forever. And the question for us to take from today, her festival, is dare we be so obedient, so full of grace, and so extraordinary that we could live our lives like Mary.